"I'm sorry, ma'am. We can't let them in without your signature." The security guard's words echoed through the lobby, and for a moment, the entire room went silent. My daughter-in-law Ashley laughed as if it were some kind of misunderstanding. My son Ryan rolled his eyes and stepped forward, already reaching for his wallet as though money could solve every problem. I simply stood there with my hands folded over my purse and watched. At 68 years old, I had learned something important about people. The louder they celebrate victory, the less prepared they are for the truth. Ashley glanced over her shoulder toward the guests gathered behind her. "There has to be a mistake," she said with a bright smile. "I organized this entire event." The security guard remained polite. "I understand, ma'am. But according to our records, final authorization requires Mrs. Margaret Collins' signature." My name sounded strange in that moment. Not because I had forgotten it. Because no one else had spoken it all day. "I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end and tell me where you're watching from." I never imagined that a single signature would reveal exactly how my family truly saw me. The morning had started like every other disappointing family event over the last few years. I woke before sunrise in my small lakeside home outside Madison, Wisconsin. The sky was painted in soft shades of gray and gold, and the water beyond my kitchen window was perfectly still. I made coffee in the same ceramic mug my late husband Thomas had bought me 20 years earlier. The mug was chipped near the handle, but I couldn't bring myself to replace it. Some things deserve to stay even when they show their age. On the kitchen table sat an invitation embossed with silver lettering. It announced the grand opening of the Collins Community Center. Reporters would attend. Local officials would attend. Donors would attend. According to the invitation, nearly everyone important would be there. Everyone except, apparently, the woman who had helped build it. My name appeared near the bottom in small print under the words "Special Guest." I stared at those words longer than I should have. Special guest. Not founder. Not benefactor. Not board chair. Just guest. A stranger invited to observe something that had once belonged to her. The strange part was that nobody seemed to think I would notice. Ashley certainly didn't. Over the past 3 years, she had become very skilled at rewriting history one tiny detail at a time. A missing photograph here. An omitted name there. A speech that forgot to mention certain people. Nothing dramatic. Nothing obvious. Just enough to slowly erase someone from the story. Ryan followed her lead. That hurt more than I cared to admit. He used to call me every Sunday afternoon without fail. Now weeks could pass without hearing his voice unless Ashley needed something. Still, I put on my navy blue dress, brushed my silver hair, and drove the 40 minutes into the city. Part of me hoped I was imagining things. Part of me wanted to believe that today would be different. But as I stepped into the crowded lobby and saw Ashley standing beneath a giant banner displaying her photograph beside the center's logo, I felt something settle quietly inside me. Not anger, not sadness, certainty. And certainty can be far more powerful than either one. The drive into Madison gave me far too much time to think. The highway stretched ahead beneath a pale autumn sky, and the radio played softly in the background, though I barely heard it. My mind kept drifting backward, piecing together moments that had seemed harmless at the time. Looking back, the changes had started shortly after Thomas passed away. Grief has a way of making you overlook things. You are so busy learning how to live without someone that you do not always notice what is happening around you. During those first months, Ashley was attentive. She brought casseroles to my house. She called to check on me. She insisted that I attend every planning meeting for the community center that Thomas had dreamed of building. I remember feeling grateful. Ryan seemed grateful too. We were all carrying the same loss, or so I believed. Then little things began to change. Ashley started answering questions directed at me. If someone asked about funding, she responded before I could speak. If a newspaper reporter requested an interview, she volunteered herself. At first I assumed she was simply trying to help. She was younger, energetic, and eager to prove herself. But over time, helping slowly became controlling. I noticed my name appearing lower on event programs. I noticed photographs being taken without anyone asking me to join. During one board meeting, a donor thanked Ashley for her vision. She smiled and accepted the compliment without mentioning that the original plans had been drawn by Thomas at our kitchen table years earlier. I still remember sitting there with my hands folded in my lap, waiting for the correction that never came. The room moved on as though history itself had quietly shifted. Ryan never seemed to notice. Or perhaps he noticed, and chose comfort over conflict. That possibility hurt far more. There was a time when my son would defend me without hesitation. I remembered little league games, school concerts, college graduations. He used to search for me in every crowd. Now I often felt invisible, standing only a few feet away. About 18 months before the grand opening, I attended a fundraising gala at a downtown hotel. The ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers and polished silver centerpieces. Ashley stood on stage accepting recognition for leadership. When the applause filled the room, she looked radiant beneath the lights. I applauded too. Everyone did. Yet as I watched her smile, I experienced a strange feeling that I could not explain. It was as though I were watching someone carefully step into a role that did not belong to her. Later that evening, I found a framed display near the entrance featuring photographs of the project from its earliest days. Thomas appeared in several pictures. Ashley appeared in many more. I searched every panel twice before realizing there was not a single photograph of me. Not one. I remember staring at the display for several seconds before quietly walking away. At the time, I told myself it was an oversight. Standing in the community center lobby now, watching guests congratulate Ashley beneath banners carrying her image, I finally understood something I should have understood much sooner. It was never one mistake. It was a pattern, and patterns tell the truth long before people do. The realization stayed with me as I moved through the lobby that morning. Everywhere I looked, there were signs of careful planning. Fresh flowers lined the entrance. Local business owners mingled near the registration tables. Reporters adjusted camera equipment while volunteers guided guests toward the auditorium. It was exactly the kind of event Thomas had always envisioned. He believed communities became stronger when people invested in one another. That belief was the reason the center existed in the first place. Yet standing there among hundreds of people, I felt strangely disconnected from something that had once been deeply personal. I accepted a program from a volunteer and glanced through its pages. Ashley's photograph appeared 3 times. Ryan's appeared twice. There was a full-page article describing their leadership and dedication. My name appeared once in small print near the back among a list of contributors. I ran my finger across the page and smiled to myself. It was almost impressive how thorough the revision had become. A few years earlier, I might have confronted someone. I might have asked uncomfortable questions or demanded explanations. Age teaches a different kind of wisdom. Sometimes people reveal more when you allow them to continue speaking. Sometimes silence becomes the most valuable seat in the room. I found my assigned table near the rear of the auditorium. From there I could see the stage clearly. Ashley stood near the podium, greeting local officials with effortless confidence. She laughed easily. She shook hands. She accepted compliments as though she had spent years preparing for this moment. Ryan remained close beside her, nodding proudly whenever someone praised the project. Watching them together reminded me of another afternoon nearly a year earlier. We had been reviewing preliminary construction plans in a conference room overlooking the city. During the meeting, one of the architects asked a simple question about the original funding structure. Before I could answer, Ashley interrupted. She spoke confidently for several minutes, explaining decisions she had never actually made. Nobody corrected her, not even Ryan. Afterward, as we rode the elevator down together, I asked Ryan whether he remembered who had negotiated the initial property purchase. He hesitated for only a second before changing the subject entirely. That tiny moment stayed with me, not because he forgot, because he remembered and chose not to say it aloud. The auditorium gradually filled with guests. Conversations blended into a low hum of excitement. Near the front, I noticed a large display featuring photographs documenting the center's development. Curious, I walked over for a closer look. The earliest photographs showed empty land before construction began. Then came images of fundraising dinners, planning meetings, and groundbreaking ceremonies. Ashley appeared repeatedly. Ryan appeared often. Several donors appeared as well. I studied every photograph carefully. Once again, I was nowhere to be found. A young woman standing nearby smiled at the display. Ashley really built something incredible, she said. I returned her smile. Yes, I replied softly. That is certainly the story being told. The woman nodded without understanding what I meant. How could she? She only knew the version placed in front of her. Most people do. As I turned away from the display, my eyes drifted toward the entrance doors where security personnel stood monitoring arrivals. At the time, They seemed like an ordinary part of the event, another detail in a long list of details. But later, those doors would become the center of everything. I returned to my table and sat quietly while the program continued around me. A city council member stepped onto the stage and began speaking about vision, leadership, and community impact. The audience listened attentively. Applause came at all the expected moments. Yet my thoughts had already drifted elsewhere. 3 days before the grand opening, I had received a phone call that changed everything. The call came just after breakfast. I was washing dishes when my phone rang. The name on the screen surprised me. It was Richard Bennett, the attorney who had handled many of Thomas's business affairs over the years. Richard was 74 now and worked only part-time, but he had always been meticulous. If he called unexpectedly, there was usually a reason. He asked whether I could meet him that afternoon. His tone was calm, but something about it felt unusually serious. We met at a small law office on the east side of the city. The building was modest and quiet. Sunlight filtered through the blinds as Richard placed a thick folder on the conference table between us. For several moments, he simply looked at me. Then he asked a question that seemed strange at the time. "Margaret, have you reviewed the final governance documents for the community center recently?" I admitted that I had not. For years, I trusted the board to manage daily operations. Richard nodded slowly. "That is what I was afraid of." He opened the folder and carefully arranged several documents in front of me. Most of the pages contained legal language I barely remembered signing years earlier. Then he pointed to a specific section highlighted in yellow. "Thomas insisted on this provision," he said. He was very firm about it. I leaned forward and began reading. At first, nothing seemed remarkable. Then I reached a paragraph near the bottom of the page. I read it twice, then a third time. According to the governing agreement, no major facility activation, restricted access authorization, donor recognition event, or public dedication ceremony could proceed without final written approval from the founding trustee. I looked up at Richard. "Founding trustee?" He gave me a small smile. "That would be you." For a moment, neither of us spoke. I stared at the document, trying to process what I was seeing. Richard continued. "Thomas believed your judgment was essential. He wanted to ensure nobody could remove you from the project you built together." A strange feeling settled over me. Not satisfaction, not anger, something quieter. Validation. All those years, Thomas had understood something I had not. He knew people could rewrite stories. He knew memories could be manipulated. So he left behind something stronger than memory. He left documentation. Before I left the office, Richard asked whether I planned to mention any of this to Ryan or Ashley. I folded the papers carefully and slipped them into my purse. "No," I said. "Not yet." Richard studied me for a second before nodding. "Then I suspect the next few days will be very interesting." Sitting in the auditorium now, listening to another speaker praise Ashley's leadership, I remembered those words. At the time, I thought Richard was exaggerating. Looking back, he was not even close. The speeches continued for nearly an hour. One after another, community leaders stepped onto the stage to praise the project and the people they believed had brought it to life. I listened politely, applauding when everyone else applauded. Years ago, I might have felt hurt by the omissions. That morning, I simply observed them. There is a certain freedom that comes when you finally stop expecting fairness from people who have already shown you who they are. Ashley seemed completely at ease. From my seat near the back, I watched her move confidently through the crowd during every break. She greeted donors by name. She posed for photographs. She accepted congratulations with the ease of someone who believed she had earned every bit of recognition coming her way. Ryan looked proud. More than once, I saw him place a reassuring hand on her shoulder as guests praised her leadership. The two of them looked like a successful team standing at the center of a story they had carefully constructed together. Around noon, the formal program ended and guests began moving toward the newly completed donor wing. According to the schedule printed in every program, this was supposed to be the most important moment of the day. Local officials, major contributors, and media representatives would receive a private guided tour before the facility officially opened to the public. Ashley appeared especially excited about this portion of the event. I overheard her speaking with several reporters near the refreshment table. "The donor wing really represents the future of what we are building here," she said. "I cannot wait for everyone to see it." The reporters nodded and scribbled notes. One asked whether she had always envisioned the project becoming this successful. Ashley smiled. From the beginning, she replied. I knew what this community needed. The answer lingered in my mind. Not because it surprised me, because it no longer did. A few minutes later, I noticed a volunteer approaching Ashley with a clipboard. The young woman looked nervous. She spoke quietly, but I caught enough of the conversation to understand that something was missing from the final authorization packet. Ashley dismissed the concern almost immediately. Everything is handled, she said. Do not worry about paperwork today. The volunteer hesitated before walking away. I watched the exchange carefully. Then I looked toward the entrance of the donor wing. Several security personnel had already taken their positions near the access doors. Their expressions remained professional and neutral. At first glance, nothing appeared unusual. Yet I remembered every word Richard had said in his office 3 days earlier. No major activation. No restricted access authorization. No dedication ceremony. Not without final approval. The realization settled quietly over me. Ashley did not know. Ryan did not know. Or perhaps they had forgotten. Either way, they were moving forward with complete confidence. Sometimes confidence is built on preparation. Sometimes it is built on assumptions. The difference between the two becomes obvious only when reality arrives. As guests gathered near the entrance for the private tour, Ashley stepped forward to welcome everyone. Cameras were raised. Smiles appeared. The atmosphere felt celebratory. Standing near the back of the crowd, I adjusted the strap of my purse and glanced briefly at the folder resting inside. Then I looked toward the security doors and waited. Guests began forming a line near the entrance to the donor wing. The energy in the room shifted noticeably. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. Cameras flashed. Reporters adjusted microphones. Local officials gathered near the front alongside major contributors and community leaders. Ashley stood confidently beside the doors, greeting each person with the polished smile she seemed to reserve for public events. Ryan remained close by, speaking with a television reporter who appeared eager to feature the center in an evening broadcast. From where I stood, everything looked perfect. That was precisely why nobody noticed the problem. Perfection has a way of hiding cracks until the weight becomes too much. One by one, guests approached the entrance. Security personnel checked credentials and directed people into position. Ashley glanced toward the crowd and raised her voice just enough for everyone nearby to hear. She thanked the donors, praised the volunteers, and spoke about the years of dedication that had made the project possible. More applause followed. Several people turned toward her with admiration. Then she extended her arm toward the doors. Let us go inside, she announced. The lead security officer nodded politely and stepped toward a control panel mounted beside the entrance. He checked a tablet, frowned slightly, and tapped the screen again. At first, nobody thought much of it. Technology occasionally creates delays. Ashley continued smiling. The officer spoke quietly into a radio. Another security employee approached and reviewed the information. Their expressions remained professional, but I noticed the subtle exchange of glances between them. A minute passed, then another. The crowd began shifting impatiently. Ashley finally stepped forward. Is there a problem? She asked. The officer looked at his tablet once more. We are verifying final authorization, ma'am. Ashley gave a small laugh. Everything has already been approved. The officer remained calm. I understand. We are simply following procedure. Something in his tone made me look down for a moment. Not because I was nervous, because I suddenly remembered Thomas sitting at our kitchen table years ago, carefully reviewing legal documents late into the evening. Back then, I had teased him for reading every page so thoroughly. He only smiled and said that details matter most when everyone else forgets them. The crowd continued waiting. Reporters exchanged curious looks. A city council member checked his watch. Ryan approached the security officer and spoke with visible confidence. Whatever he said seemed intended to resolve the situation quickly. Instead, the officer listened, nodded politely, and returned his attention to the tablet. Ryan's smile faded slightly. Across the lobby, I noticed the young volunteer with the clipboard from earlier. She stood near a reception table, watching the scene unfold. Unlike everyone else, she did not appear surprised. She looked worried. Very worried. Ashley attempted another laugh and turned towards several guests. Just a small delay, she said. Nothing to worry about. Most people nodded. Yet uncertainty had already entered the room. It moved quietly through the crowd, passing from conversation to conversation. I remained exactly where I was. My purse rested comfortably against my shoulder. Inside, the folder had not moved since I left Richard's office. Neither had the documents. Sometimes people spend years building an illusion. Sometimes all it takes is a missing piece of paper to reveal what was always true. The delay had now stretched long enough that nobody could pretend it was routine. Conversations grew quieter. Reporters who had been chatting casually a few minutes earlier were now paying close attention. Cameras remained pointed toward the entrance. The security team continued reviewing information on their devices while guests exchanged uncertain glances. Ashley's smile was beginning to look strained. Ryan checked his phone several times and spoke briefly with one of the event coordinators. Neither appeared to be getting the answers they expected. Finally, the lead security officer stepped away from the control panel and approached Ashley directly. The crowd instinctively fell silent. Even from the back of the gathering, I could sense the shift in atmosphere. People were no longer focused on the celebration. They were focused on the problem. Ashley folded her arms and gave a polite but impatient smile. "Can we move this along?" she asked. "Our guests have been waiting." The officer nodded respectfully. "I understand, ma'am. Unfortunately, we cannot grant access at this time." Ashley blinked. What exactly is missing? For the first time, the officer spoke loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "Final authorization from the founding trustee has not been submitted." Several people exchanged confused looks. Ashley laughed softly. It was the kind of laugh people use when they assume a misunderstanding will be corrected within seconds. "There must be some mistake," she said. "I oversee this facility." The officer glanced at his tablet. "According to the governance records, authorization requires approval from Mrs. Margaret Collins." My name drifted through the crowd like a sudden gust of wind. I noticed several heads turn. A reporter lowered his notebook and looked around the room. One of the city officials frowned, as though trying to remember where he had heard my name before. Ryan stepped forward immediately. "My mother is a donor," he said. "Surely there is another way to handle this." The officer remained calm. "Sir, I can only follow the procedures on file." Ashley's expression changed ever so slightly. For the first time that day, genuine uncertainty appeared behind her eyes. She looked toward Ryan. Ryan looked back at her. Neither seemed entirely sure what to say next. The silence between them told its own story. I remembered another moment years earlier when Thomas and I sat together reviewing plans for the center. He had looked over his reading glasses and smiled. "People pay attention to titles," he told me. "But real responsibility lives in the fine print." At the time, I thought he was talking about contracts. Standing there now, I realized he had been talking about people. Around us, the guests waited. Nobody left. If anything, more people moved closer. Curiosity has a powerful pull. Ashley attempted one final explanation. She assured everyone the issue would be resolved shortly. Yet her confidence sounded thinner now. Less certain. Less practiced. The story she had spent years presenting was beginning to encounter something it could not easily explain. I remained where I was, quiet and unnoticed by most of the crowd. The folder inside my purse felt surprisingly light. Not because the documents lacked importance. Because the weight I had been carrying for years was no longer mine alone. For the first time, everyone else was beginning to see what I had seen. The crowd no longer looked at Ashley the way they had an hour earlier. Admiration had given way to confusion, and confusion was quickly becoming curiosity. Questions traveled quietly from person to person. Who was Margaret Collins? Why was her approval required? Why had nobody mentioned this before? The answers were sitting only a few yards away, yet most people had spent the entire day overlooking them. Ashley took a slow breath and forced another smile. I recognized that smile. It was the same expression she used whenever circumstances slipped beyond her control. Calm on the surface, calculating underneath. She turned toward the security officer. "Can you show me exactly what document you are referring to?" she asked. The officer rotated his tablet and pointed to the screen. I could not see the details from where I stood, but I did not need to. I already knew what was there. Ashley's eyes moved across the display. Her smile disappeared. Ryan leaned closer to read it as well. The color seemed to drain from his face. Neither of them spoke immediately. That silence told the room more than any explanation could have. A reporter near the front noticed the reaction and quietly raised his camera. Another began taking notes. Nearby donors exchanged glances. The city council member who had praised Ashley earlier now looked visibly uncomfortable. The narrative everyone had accepted so easily was beginning to unravel. Not dramatically, not loudly, just one thread at a time. Ryan finally turned and scanned the crowd. His eyes landed on me. For a brief moment, he looked exactly like the little boy who used to search for me after school concerts. Except now there was no excitement in his expression, only realization. He started walking toward me. Ashley followed a few steps behind. The crowd instinctively parted to let them pass. I remained where I was. My hands rested calmly on my purse. Ryan stopped in front of me and lowered his voice. "Mom, did you know about this?" It was an interesting question, not because of the words themselves, but because of everything hidden behind them. Did I know that my name had been removed from programs? Yes. Did I know that photographs had been edited to exclude me? Yes. Did I know that people were being encouraged to forget who helped build this place? Yes. But that was not what he was really asking. He was asking whether I knew I still mattered. I looked at him quietly before answering. "Your father did." Ryan blinked. Ashley folded her arms. "Margaret, if there is paperwork missing, we can resolve it right now." Her tone was polite, but the strain beneath it was impossible to miss. I nodded gently. "Of course we can." Around us, conversation stopped completely. Even the reporters had fallen silent. The room seemed to hold its breath. Slowly, I opened my purse and removed the folder Richard had given me 3 days earlier. The documents were neatly organized, each page exactly where it belonged. I held them carefully in my hands. For years, people had treated me as though I were becoming less important. Older, easier to ignore, easier to erase. Yet at that moment, every eye in the room was fixed on the same thing. Not Ashley, not Ryan, not the cameras. A simple folder containing the truth. For several seconds, nobody moved. The room seemed suspended between two versions of the same story. One version had been carefully presented all day. The other sat quietly inside the folder resting in my hands. Ryan looked at the documents, then at me. I could see the questions forming behind his eyes. Ashley remained composed, but only barely. The confidence that had carried her through the morning was gone. In its place stood uncertainty. I opened the folder and removed the final authorization page. The paper itself was ordinary, white, simple, unremarkable, yet it carried more authority than every speech delivered that day. The lead security officer stepped forward respectfully. I handed him the document. He reviewed it, confirmed the information on his tablet, and nodded. The change was immediate. Within moments, staff members began receiving updated notifications. The access restriction disappeared. The donor wing was officially cleared to open. A murmur spread through the crowd. Some guests looked relieved. Others looked embarrassed. A few reporters exchanged meaningful glances before returning to their notes. The officer thanked me and stepped away to complete the process. That could have been the end of it. I could have signed the document, accepted a few polite apologies, and allowed everyone to continue pretending nothing important had happened. But something else happened instead. One of the city officials approached me and extended his hand. "Mrs. Collins," he said, "I do not believe we have properly thanked you for your contribution." Another donor stepped forward. Then another. Within minutes, people were asking questions. Real questions. They wanted to know about Thomas. They wanted to know how the project started. They wanted to know who purchased the original property and secured the first funding commitments. For the first time in years, the truth did not need my defense. It spoke for itself. Ryan stood quietly nearby, listening to conversations he should have heard long ago. Ashley said very little. There was nothing left to explain. Facts rarely argue. They simply exist. Eventually, the doors opened and guests began entering the donor wing. The ceremony continued. Photographs were taken. Interviews resumed. Yet the atmosphere had changed. Not because anyone had been humiliated. Not because anyone had been punished. Because people finally understood the full story. Later that afternoon, as the event came to an end, Ryan approached me alone. His expression carried none of the certainty he had worn earlier. "Mom," he said softly, "I should have paid more attention." I looked at him for a moment before nodding. "Yes," I replied. "You should have." There was no anger in my voice. Anger would have required carrying a burden I no longer wanted. The sun was beginning to lower in the sky as I walked toward the parking lot. Behind me, guests continued talking about the center and its future. Ahead of me waited the quiet drive home beside the lake. I felt lighter than I had in years. Not because I had won anything. Because I no longer needed anyone's permission to remember who I was. People often assume power belongs to the loudest person in the room. Thomas understood better. Real power is not found in speeches, titles, or applause. It lives in truth. And truth has a remarkable habit of waiting patiently until the moment it is finally seen.